Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of history's most fascinating survival stories. How medieval monks managed to sleep through bone-chilling nights in stone monasteries without modern heating insulation, or even the basic comforts we take for granted. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. in January 1347, and you're lying on a wooden plank in a drafty dormitory where your breath freezes in the air above your face. The temperature inside is barely warmer than the howling winter wind outside, and somewhere in the darkness an iron bell begins to toll, calling you to prayer. You probably won't survive this without developing some serious survival skills. These weren't just holy men seeking spiritual enlightenment. They were Arctic explorers in robes mastering the art of staying alive through sheer ingenuity, community warmth, and what can only be described as supernatural stubbornness. From shared body heat techniques that would make penguins jealous to sacred flame rituals that doubled as life support monks, developed an entire science of cold weather survival that kept them breathing through centuries of brutal winters. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The iron bell cuts through the darkness like a blade, its metallic voice echoing off stone walls that have absorbed centuries of winter cold. You jolt awake on your narrow wooden bed, the sound reverberating through your bones as much as your ears. Around you, 60 other monks stir in the dormitory, their movements creating a rustling symphony of rough wool and creaking timber. The air is so cold that each exhale creates a small cloud of vapor, visible even in the near total darkness. This is Matins, the first prayer service of the monastic day, and it begins at what most people would consider the dead of night. But for you as a medieval monk, this 2 a.m. wake-up call isn't just spiritual discipline, it's a carefully timed survival strategy. Your body has been generating heat under rough blankets for several hours, creating a small cocoon of warmth around your sleeping form. The bell forces you to abandon this precious warmth and venture into corridors where frost literally forms on the walls. The wooden plank beneath you offers all the comfort of sleeping on a park bench, except park benches don't usually come with splinters and the existential weight of medieval monastic discipline. Your mattress, if we're being generous with terminology, consists of a thin layer of straw wrapped in coarse linen. Essentially a very expensive pillowcase stuffed with what amounts to horse food. The straw has been compressed by months of use into something resembling cardboard, and you can feel every knot and grain of the wooden board underneath pressing against your hip bones and ribs. Medieval monastery beds weren't designed for comfort, they were engineered for suffering with purpose. The rule of St. Benedict explicitly discouraged luxury in sleeping arrangements, viewing soft bedding as a pathway to spiritual weakness. So here you lie on timber that was probably cut from the same forests that built the monastery walls, seasoned by decades of supporting sleeping monks who learned to find rest despite conditions that would make a medieval peasant grateful for their straw pile at home. The bed frame itself is a masterpiece of utilitarian carpentry. Thick posts of oak or elm joined with wooden pegs rather than metal hardware built to last centuries rather than seasons. Some monasteries use simple rope supports stretched between the frame, creating a slightly flexible surface that could accommodate a monk's weight without breaking. Others preferred solid planks, believing that the firmer surface promoted better posture and prevented the spine from developing sinful curves during sleep. Your bedding consists of whatever wool blankets the monastery could afford or produce from their own sheep. These aren't the soft processed woolens that nobles might enjoy, but rough, scratchy fabric that still smells faintly of lanolin and sheep. The weave is loose enough that cold air circulates freely through the fibres, and the wool has been dyed with whatever natural materials were available, usually resulting in colours that can charitably be described as muted brown or enthusiastic grey. But here's where medieval ingenuity reveals itself: that scratchy wool blanket becomes a sophisticated piece of survival equipment. Wool retains warmth, even when damp, which is crucial in stone buildings where humidity condenses on every surface. The rough fibres trap air in tiny pockets, creating insulation that can mean the difference between sleep and hypothermia. You learn to wrap the blanket, strategically tucking edges under your body to prevent cold drafts from sneaking underneath, creating what amounts to a medieval sleeping bag. The pillow situation would make modern sleepers weep. Most monks simply folded their day robes into a lumpy bundle, creating a headrest that smelled like whatever activities they'd been engaged in: bread baking, manuscript copying, or mucking out the monastery stables. Wealthier monasteries might provide small linen bags stuffed with chaff or down, but these were considered borderline luxurious and sometimes forbidden during penitential seasons. Historians still argue whether the discomfort was entirely intentional or partly practical. Some scholars suggest that uncomfortable bedding served multiple purposes. It prevented monks from becoming too attached to worldly comfort, discouraged oversleeping, and frankly was cheaper to maintain than elaborate bedding systems. Others point out that even with the best intentions, medieval technology simply couldn't produce the kind of comfortable mattresses we take for granted. The wooden plank also served as a spiritual metaphor that monks would have understood instinctively. Just as Christ suffered on the wooden cross, monks accepted their wooden beds as a form of daily crucifixion, a voluntary embrace of discomfort that connected them to divine suffering. Every morning you woke with aching joints and stiff muscles. You were participating in a theology of physical sacrifice that transformed ordinary sleep into religious practice. And yet, despite the apparent austerity, these beds represented sophisticated survival technology for their time. The elevated wooden platform kept you off the stone floor, which would literally suck warmth from your body through conduction. The solid construction meant the bed wouldn't collapse during winter storms when the building shifted and creaked. The simple design allowed for easy cleaning and inspection, important considerations in communal living situations where bedbugs and lice were constant concerns. The straw filling wasn't just randomly stuffed padding. It was carefully selected and replaced seasonally. Fresh straw in autumn provided better insulation and fewer insects, while old straw was composted for the monastery gardens. Some monasteries developed reputations for producing particularly good straw mattresses, with visiting monks commenting on the relative comfort of different communities' sleeping arrangements. So as you lie there on your wooden plank, feeling every uncomfortable angle and surface, remember that this bed represents a carefully calculated balance between spiritual discipline and practical survival. It's uncomfortable enough to remind you that earthly pleasures are temporary, but functional enough to keep you alive through another freezing night in medieval Europe. The dormitory stretches before you like a vast cavern of controlled breathing, 60 monks arranged in neat rows, as if someone had organized a medieval sleepover for the world's most disciplined guests. The silence isn't just quiet. It's a living, breathing entity that wraps around each sleeping form and demands absolute reverence. Under the rule of St. Benedict, talking after Compline prayers was strictly forbidden, transforming the dormitory into a theatre of whispers, shuffles, and the occasional involuntary snore that everyone pretended not to hear. But here's where the genius of communal sleeping reveals itself. 60 human bodies generate a surprising amount of heat, even when each individual monk is shivering under his thin wool blanket. The dormitory becomes a kind of medieval heating system, powered entirely by shared body warmth and strategically positioned sleeping arrangements. The beds are placed close enough that you can hear your neighbours breathing, sometimes close enough to feel the warmth radiating from their body when they shift in their sleep. The architecture itself was designed to capture and hold this collective warmth. High stone walls absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly through the night, though slowly is relative when you're dealing with medieval building techniques. The ceiling soared overhead, creating a vast space that should theoretically have been impossible to heat, but the monks discovered that warm air rose and circulated, creating convection currents that distributed body heat throughout the hall. Each monk's sleeping space was marked by tradition, rather than physical barriers. You knew exactly where your bed ended and your neighbours began, even in complete darkness. This intimate proximity meant that when Brother Thomas next to you developed a fever, you'd feel the extra warmth radiating from his body before the infirmarian noticed his illness. When elderly Brother Augustine's breathing became laboured during winter nights, the surrounding monks would unconsciously adjust their own breathing rhythms, creating a kind of respiratory harmony that helped everyone sleep more deeply. The younger monks, typically placed in the centre of the dormitory, benefited from the warmth of their elders on both sides. Novices who were still adjusting to the rigorous schedule might find themselves unconsciously seeking the warmth of more experienced monks, learning not just the prayers and routines, but also the subtle art of sharing body heat without breaking the rule of silence. Some monasteries deliberately arranged beds so that the largest, warmest monks were positioned near smaller, more cold-sensitive brothers, a kind of medieval buddy system for thermal survival. Winter nights brought their own acoustic landscape to the dormitory. The sound of 60 men breathing created a low, rhythmic hum that actually helped mask individual sleep disturbances. When someone coughed or shifted position, the sound was absorbed into this collective respiratory symphony. The stone walls amplified certain frequencies while dampening others, creating what modern acoustics experts would recognize as a surprisingly sophisticated sound environment for sleep. Historians still argue whether the close sleeping arrangements were primarily spiritual discipline or practical necessity. Monastic rules emphasize the importance of community life, suggesting that even sleep should be a shared experience rather than a private indulgence. But practical evidence suggests that survival concerns played an equally important role. Monasteries in warmer climates often featured more spacious dormitory arrangements, while Northern European communities packed their monks together with obvious attention to heat conservation. The dormitory also served as a kind of early warning system for medical emergencies. In an age when sudden illness could be fatal, having 60 people within earshot meant that distress calls could be heard and responded to quickly. Nighttime deaths were unfortunately common during harsh winters, but the communal sleeping arrangement ensured that bodies were discovered quickly, preventing the spread of disease and allowing for proper spiritual ministrations. Some monasteries developed sophisticated protocols for managing the dormitory's thermal dynamics. Monks returning from night prayers would be assigned specific positions to minimize heat loss for the entire community. The youngest and oldest monks might be allowed to return to bed first, while the heartiest brothers ensured that candles were properly extinguished and doors securely closed against winter drafts. The psychological impact of communal sleeping can't be underestimated either. Facing a brutal winter night alone in a private cell would have been terrifying for most medieval people, but being surrounded by breathing living companions provided emotional warmth that complemented the physical heat sharing. The knowledge that 60 other men were enduring exactly the same discomfort create a powerful sense of solidarity that helped individual monks push through their most challenging nights. And yet this communal warmth came with its own challenges. 60 people in close proximity meant that illness spread quickly. Personal hygiene became a community concern, and individual sleep disturbances could ripple through the entire dormitory. The monks developed subtle protocols for managing these issues. Specific ways of moving quietly, breathing techniques that minimize snoring, and even particular positions for sleeping that reduce the likelihood of disturbing neighbors. Your wool robe becomes your armor against the cold, and unlike medieval knights who could remove their chainmail at day's end, you never escape this scratchy utilitarian uniform. The habit you wear to prayers is the same habit you sleep in, the same habit you work in, and the same habit that will serve as your burial shroud when your time comes. This isn't laziness or lack of hygiene. It's a carefully engineered survival strategy disguised as spiritual discipline. Medieval monastic robes were essentially wearable blankets designed with layering principles that wouldn't look out of place in a modern outdoor gear catalogue. The inner tunic, made of rough linen or wool, sits directly against your skin, providing a base layer that wicks moisture while maintaining insulation. Over this goes the main habit, a long, loose-fitting robe that traps warm air in its folds and allows for freedom of movement during the night's multiple prayer services. The wool itself deserves particular attention. Medieval monasteries often maintained their own sheep flocks producing wool that was processed specifically for durability rather than comfort. This isn't the soft merino wool of the modern sweaters. It's coarse, oily, and retains the natural lanolin that makes sheep waterproof. That lanolin also makes the wool naturally antibacterial and odor-resistant, crucial qualities when you're wearing the same garment day and night for weeks at a time. But here's where medieval ingenuity shows its brilliance. The loose cut of monastic robes creates multiple air pockets that function as insulation layers. When you pull your knees up toward your chest in bed, the robe billows around your body, trapping warm air like a tent. The wide sleeves can be wrapped around your torso, essentially giving you built-in arm warmers. The hood, when pulled up, creates a microclimate around your head and neck, preventing heat loss from your most vulnerable areas. The belt, that simple rope cord tied around your waist, serves multiple thermal functions beyond holding your robe closed. It can be loosened at night to allow better circulation and heat distribution, or tightened to create a more secure seal against cold drafts. Some monks develop techniques for repositioning their belts during sleep to create better insulation around their core, turning a simple rope into a sophisticated temperature regulation system. Underneath the main habit, many monks wore additional layers that would make modern thermal underwear manufacturers jealous. Wool stockings that reached nearly to the knee, sometimes 2 pairs in winter. Linen undergarments that provided a barrier between skin and the rougher outer wool. Some monasteries even allowed leather or felt shoe liners that could be removed and worn as additional foot warmers during particularly brutal nights. The colour of monastic robes, typically brown, black or undyed wool, wasn't just about humility. These dark colours absorbed more heat during daylight hours and retained warmth longer into the night. A black wool robe that had been exposed to even weak winter sunlight could continue radiating that stored heat for hours after sunset, providing crucial thermal support during the coldest parts of the night. Historians still argue whether the practice of sleeping fully clothed was primarily spiritual or practical. Monastic rules emphasize being always ready for prayer, suggesting that remaining dressed was about spiritual preparedness rather than thermal necessity. But surviving accounts from northern European monasteries make it clear that the clothing as insulation strategy was well understood and deliberately implemented. The seasonal adjustments to monastic clothing reveal sophisticated understanding of thermal regulation. Summer habits were lighter and more loosely woven, while winter garments featured tighter weaves and heavier weights. Some monasteries maintained separate sleeping robes, slightly looser and warmer than the daily work habits, though these were considered borderline luxurious and sometimes forbidden during penitential seasons. Maintenance of these essential garments became a community survival activity. Monks spent winter evenings mending tiers, reweaving worn sections, and treating the wool with additional lanolin to maintain its water-resistant properties. A torn robe in January wasn't just inconvenient. It could be life-threatening, creating gaps where cold air could penetrate the carefully constructed thermal system. The psychological impact of eternal layering shouldn't be underestimated either. Removing clothing at night creates vulnerability, both physical and emotional. By maintaining their robes throughout the sleep cycle, monks preserved not just body heat but also their spiritual identity. The habit became a kind of portable monastery, carrying the sacred space and community identity with them even into the private realm of sleep. Some monasteries developed specific techniques for robe-based heat sharing. When monks prayed together in the chapel during night services, they would arrange themselves so that the edges of their robes overlapped, creating communal warmth pools. The fabric became a medium for thermal communication, allowing heat to flow between bodies while maintaining the appearance of individual prayer and meditation. And yet this system had its drawbacks. Wool that was never properly aired retained moisture and odours, creating hygiene challenges in the close quarters of the dormitory. The constant wearing of heavy fabric could cause skin irritation and heat rashes, particularly during seasonal transitions. Some monks developed what we might recognise as seasonal affective responses to never escaping their heavy dark clothing. The bell's iron voice cuts through your dreams like a frozen blade, and suddenly you're stumbling through corridors where your footsteps echo off stone walls that glisten with frost. This is matins, the great midnight office that transforms every monk into a sleep-deprived spiritual warrior, shuffling through darkness toward a chapel that's somehow even colder than the dormitory you just left. Your breath creates small clouds that dissipate in the candlelit gloom as you join the procession of robed figures moving like ghosts through the monastery's frozen arteries. The chapel in winter becomes a cathedral of endurance where faith is measured not just in devotion, but in your ability to remain conscious while standing on stone floors that seem to suck warmth directly from your body through your leather sandals. The massive stone walls, thick enough to withstand siege warfare, also serve as enormous thermal sinks that absorb what little heat 60 shivering monks can generate and radiate it uselessly into the winter night. By February, ice actually forms on the interior chapel walls, creating crystalline patterns that catch the candlelight in ways that are both beautiful and deeply concerning. The wooden choir stalls offer no comfort. They're designed for proper posture during prayer, not for warmth or relaxation. You stand, sit and kneel in precisely choreographed movements, while your joints stiffen with cold and your fingers grow numb around your prayer book. The Latin psalms become breath exercises as much as spiritual practice, each spoken word creating small puffs of vapour that rise toward the vaulted ceiling like visible prayers seeking heaven. But here's where medieval monks reveal their genius for survival. Through ritual, the very act of communal prayer generates heat through synchronized movement and breathing. 60 men rising, sitting and kneeling in unison creates a kind of human furnace, their collective body heat gradually warming the space around the choir stalls. The chanting itself becomes a respiratory workout that increases circulation and core body temperature, while the mental focus required for complex Latin prayers keeps minds sharp and alert despite the numbing cold. The candlelight serves multiple survival functions beyond mere illumination. Tallow candles made from animal fat burn with a warmer, more orange flame than modern wax candles, and they produce measurable heat in addition to light. A chapel filled with dozens of burning candles can raise the ambient temperature by several degrees. Not enough for comfort, but potentially enough to prevent hypothermia during the longest winter services that could stretch for 2 hours or more. Some monasteries developed sophisticated candle placement strategies, positioning larger candles near the areas where the oldest or most frail monks would stand. The abbot and senior brothers often had small braziers or heated stones placed discreetly near their choir stalls, though this was considered a medical necessity rather than a luxury. The heat from these sources would gradually spread through the chapel, creating microclimates of relative warmth that monks learned to position themselves near whenever possible. The timing of matins wasn't arbitrary. It coincided with the body's natural temperature low point when medieval people were most vulnerable to cold-related death. By forcing themselves awake and active during these dangerous hours, monks were essentially practicing a form of medical intervention, using prayer and movement to maintain circulation and body heat when their natural defences were weakest. Historians still argue whether the extreme scheduling of night prayers was primarily spiritual discipline or practical health measure. Some scholars point to the high mortality rates among elderly monks during winter months, suggesting that the physical demands were genuinely dangerous. Others note that monasteries in warmer climates maintained similar prayer schedules, indicating that the practice was about spiritual rather than thermal considerations. The chapel acoustics, designed to amplify chanted prayers, also amplified the sounds of winter itself. You could hear wind howling through gaps in the stone walls, the crack of timbers contracting in the cold, and sometimes the distant howling of wolves in the forests beyond the monastery walls. These sounds became part of the prayer experience, reminding monks of their vulnerability and the protective power of their community. The return journey to the dormitory after matins created its own survival challenges. Monks who had generated some warmth during the service now faced the shock of leaving the relatively heated chapel for corridors that felt even colder by comparison. The procession back to bed became a race against heat loss, with some monasteries developing specific walking patterns designed to minimize exposure to the coldest parts of the building. But the psychological impact of surviving matins was perhaps as important as the physical warming. Successfully completing the midnight service provided a sense of accomplishment that helped monks endure the remaining hours until dawn. Having faced the night's coldest, darkest hour in community prayer, created a spiritual warmth that complemented whatever physical heat they had managed to generate. The chapel also served as a testing ground for new monks who quickly learned whether they had the physical and mental stamina for monastic life. Those who couldn't handle the winter matin services often left the community, or were reassigned to warmer duties, creating a natural selection process that ensured only the hardiest monks remained to face the full brutality of medieval winter nights. The heat radiating from Brother Augustine's sleeping form next to you isn't just coincidence. It's survival strategy disguised as holy community living. Medieval monks discovered what modern survival experts call the huddle effect, where shared body heat becomes exponentially more effective than individual warming attempts. In the dormitory's carefully orchestrated sleeping arrangements, every monk becomes both a heat source and a heat recipient, creating a thermal network that can mean the difference between waking up stiff with cold or not waking up at all. Your bed is positioned exactly 18 inches from your neighbours, close enough that you can feel the warmth of another human body without actually touching, which would violate monastic rules about physical contact. This precise distance was calculated through centuries of trial and error, representing the optimal balance between shared warmth and personal space. Too close, and you'd disturb each other's sleep. Too far, and the precious heat would dissipate into the vast stone chamber before reaching your chilled bones. The monks instinctively arranged themselves for maximum thermal efficiency, though they'd never describe it in such practical terms. Larger, more robust brothers naturally gravitate toward positions where their body heat can benefit smaller, more cold-sensitive monks. The elderly whose circulation has slowed find themselves surrounded by younger monks whose metabolisms burn hotter through the night. Sick brothers receive the warmest sleeping positions, not as luxury but as medical intervention that could prevent minor illness from becoming fatal pneumonia. But here's where medieval ingenuity reveals its sophisticated understanding of human thermodynamics. The monks breathe in synchronized patterns that create warm air currents throughout the dormitory. Without conscious coordination, 60 sleeping men begin to match each other's respiratory rhythms, creating a gentle circulation of warmed air that flows from bed to bed. Your exhaled breath, heated by your body temperature, drifts toward your neighbor, just as his warmed exhalation reaches you, creating invisible rivers of shared heat. The positioning strategy extends beyond simple proximity. Monks learn to sleep curled toward each other, maximizing the surface area exposed to neighboring body heat, while minimizing their own heat loss to the cold air above. Your back faces the central aisle where cold drafts circulate, while your front side angles toward Brother Thomas, creating a heat-sharing partnership that neither of you acknowledges but both depend upon for survival. Some monasteries developed rotation systems during the harshest winter months where monks would shift positions every few hours to ensure that no one spent the entire night on the cold outer edges of the dormitory. These movements were accomplished in complete silence, guided by touch and long-established protocols that allowed for thermal optimization without disturbing the community's sleep. Brother Marcus, whose circulation runs cold, might find himself gradually migrating toward the center of the formation as warmer monks unconsciously make space for him. The acoustic dimension of shared sleeping creates its own warming effect. The sound of 60 men breathing produces a low-frequency hum that has been shown to promote deeper sleep and reduce stress-related heat loss. When someone coughs or shifts position, the sound is absorbed and redistributed by the community, creating what modern sleep researchers would recognize as effective white noise therapy. Your neighbor's heartbeat, audible through the thin walls and close proximity, actually helps regulate your own cardiovascular system, promoting better circulation and heat distribution. Historians still argue whether this thermal cooperation was deliberately planned or emerged naturally from necessity. Surviving monastery documents rarely mention sleeping arrangements explicitly, but visiting church officials occasionally commented on the remarkable warmth of monastic dormitories despite their obvious lack of heating systems. Some scholars suggest that abbots deliberately studied optimal bed placement, while others argue that the monks simply adapted to their environment through generations of trial and error. The shared warmth system had profound psychological effects that extended beyond mere physical comfort. Knowing that your survival depended on your brother's proximity created bonds that went beyond religious fellowship into genuine interdependence. The monk sleeping next to you wasn't just a fellow believer. He was your partner in surviving another winter night. This mutual dependence fostered the kind of community loyalty that made monastic life sustainable, even under the harshest conditions. The thermal sharing also created subtle hierarchies within the dormitory. The warmest sleeping positions, typically those surrounded by the most other beds, were often occupied by the most senior monks, though this was justified in terms of respect rather than comfort. Novices learned their place in the community partly through their assigned sleeping positions, with advancement through the monastic ranks literally bringing them closer to the warmth-generating centre of the group. But the system wasn't without its challenges. When one monk developed a fever, his elevated body temperature could overheat his immediate neighbours, creating restless nights for the entire section. Contagious illnesses spread rapidly through the close-packed sleeping arrangements, sometimes decimating monastery populations during harsh winters when immune systems were already compromised. The same proximity that provided life-saving warmth also accelerated the transmission of pneumonia, influenza, and other winter killers. The shared body heat strategy also required careful management of bedding and clothing. Too many blankets could trap heat so effectively that monks would overheat and begin sweating, creating dangerous moisture that would freeze when exposed to cold air. Too few coverings meant that individual body heat couldn't accumulate sufficiently to contribute to the communal warming effect. Each monk had to calibrate his personal thermal management to contribute optimally to the group's survival. The single tallow candle burning at the dormitory's centre becomes more than illumination. It's a beacon of hope flickering against the endless winter darkness, its warm orange glow creating a pool of psychological comfort that extends far beyond its actual heat output. This lone flame, carefully tended through the night by rotating monks, represents the monastery's commitment to maintaining light and warmth, even when both seem impossible to sustain. The candle's steady presence transforms the vast cold dormitory from a tomb-like chamber into something resembling a home where 60 men can close their eyes, knowing that dawn will eventually come. Medieval tallow candles were marvels of survival technology, crafted from rendered animal fat that burned with surprising efficiency and measurable heat production. Unlike modern paraffin candles that burn cleanly and coolly, these fat-based lights generated enough thermal energy to warm your hands when held nearby, and their smoky organic scent created olfactory associations with warmth and safety. The flickering flame danced constantly, casting moving shadows that made the dormitory feel alive and inhabited, rather than like the frozen stone crypt it resembled during daylight hours. The candle's placement wasn't arbitrary. It occupied the mathematical centre of the sleeping area, positioned to provide equal light distribution while maximising its warming effect across the greatest number of beds. Monks calculated optimal burning heights and candle sizes to ensure the flame would last through the night, without requiring frequent replacement which would disturb the community's sleep and waste precious resources. A properly sized tallow candle could burn for 8 to 10 hours, providing continuous light and heat from Compline prayers until lauds at dawn. But here's where medieval monks revealed their understanding of fire as both practical tool and spiritual symbol. The candle vigil became a form of prayer in itself, with the flame representing the eternal presence of divine light in a world of darkness and cold. The monk assigned to tend the candle wasn't just maintaining illumination, he was serving as guardian of the community's spiritual and physical warmth, ensuring that neither their bodies nor their souls would freeze during the vulnerable hours of sleep. The rotation system for candle tending created a hierarchy of trust and responsibility within the dormitory. Senior monks often took the coldest shifts, midnight to matins, when the flame was most likely to gutter in draughts and the dormitory reached its coldest temperatures. Younger monks learned fire management skills that would serve them throughout their monastic careers, understanding how to trim wicks for optimal burning position candles to avoid drafts and judge when flames were burning too high or too low for safety. The light itself provided crucial psychological benefits that extended beyond mere visibility. Medieval people lived with darkness in ways modern humans can barely comprehend. No streetlights, no electric backup systems, No reliable artificial illumination except for carefully hoarded flames. The dancing candlelight created patterns on the dormitory walls that became familiar companions to sleepless monks, providing visual focal points that helped calm anxious minds during the longest winter nights. Some monasteries developed sophisticated candle placement strategies using multiple smaller flames positioned throughout the dormitory rather than single large candles. This distributed lighting system provided more even heat distribution and reduced the risk of total darkness if one flame failed, but it required more resources and careful coordination to maintain. Historians still argue whether these multi-candle systems were practical innovations or spiritual extravagances that some communities could afford, while others made do with single flames. The wax and tallow used in monastery candles often came from the community's own resources. Beeswax from monastery apiaries, or tallow rendered from livestock raised on monastic lands. This self-sufficiency meant that candle quality varied dramatically between seasons and years, with some monasteries producing superior illumination, while others made do with smoky, low-burning lights that provided minimal heat. The best candles were often reserved for the chapel, leaving dormitories with inferior lighting that nonetheless represented crucial survival equipment. The scent of burning tallow created its own microenvironment within the dormitory, adding organic warmth to the cold stone space. Modern aromatherapy recognizes that certain scents can actually increase perceived body temperature and promote relaxation, and medieval monks intuitively understood that the familiar smell of burning animal fat made their harsh sleeping conditions more tolerable. The candle's odour mixed with woolstone and human warmth to create an olfactory signature that meant safety and community. Candle safety in medieval dormitories required constant vigilance, as a single flame could ignite dry straw bedding or woolen robes with catastrophic results. Monks developed protocols for positioning candles away from flammable materials while maintaining their warming and lighting functions, often using stone platforms or metal holders that prevented direct contact with bedding. The balance between fire safety and thermal necessity created tension that required careful management throughout the winter months. The psychological impact of the candle's presence extended into the monks' dreams and sleep patterns. The gentle flickering light prevented the complete sensory deprivation that absolute darkness would create, allowing for easier transitions between sleep and waking during the night's multiple prayer services. The flame provided a fixed reference point that helped disoriented monks navigate the dormitory when awakened suddenly for matins or other night offices. But the candle vigil also represented sacrifice and resource management in communities where every luxury had to be justified. Tallow and wax were valuable commodities that could be sold or traded for other necessities, making the decision to burn candles through the night a significant economic choice. Some monasteries limited candle use to the coldest months, while others maintained year-round vigils as expressions of their commitment to providing comfort and safety for their communities. Your straw mattress isn't a failure of medieval comfort. It's a precisely engineered instrument of spiritual discipline, designed to make every moment of rest feel earned rather than given. The thin layer of straw between your body and the wooden plank has been carefully selected, dried, and arranged not for softness but for just enough cushioning to prevent pressure sores, while maintaining the essential discomfort that monastic rules demanded. This isn't sleeping. It's practicing for eternity, where the flesh learns to find peace, despite circumstances that would send most people searching for the nearest holiday inn. The straw itself tells a story of agricultural seasons and monastic self-sufficiency. Harvested from monastery fields during autumn, The dried grain stalks are sorted for quality. The longest, straightest pieces reserved for mattress filling, while shorter fragments go to animal bedding or composting. Fresh straw in October provides better insulation and fewer insects, but by February it is compressed into something resembling medieval cardboard, offering about as much cushioning as a firm handshake and considerably less warmth than you'd get from sleeping on a pile of books. Medieval monks understood that their uncomfortable bedding served multiple theological purposes beyond simple austerity. The hard sleeping surface was supposed to keep your mind focused on spiritual rather than physical concerns, making it difficult to sink into the kind of deep, luxurious sleep that might promote worldly dreams or carnal thoughts. Every shift in position reminded you that earthly comfort was temporary, while the discomfort prepared your soul for whatever hardships awaited in the afterlife. It was theology you could feel in your hip bones every morning. But here's where medieval ingenuity reveals itself. Through adaptation, monks developed sleeping techniques that worked with rather than against their austere bedding. They learned to position their bodies to distribute weight evenly across the straw, avoiding pressure points that could cause numbness or pain. Side sleeping with knees drawn up minimized contact with the wooden frame, while maximizing the insulating effect of their woolen robes. Some monks became experts at arranging their straw to create subtle contours that supported their bodies more effectively. The seasonal cycle of mattress replacement created its own rhythm within monastery life. Spring cleaning involved completely refreshing all dormitory bedding with old straw composted for the gardens and fresh materials prepared for the coming year. This annual renewal meant that monks experienced a gradual decline in sleeping comfort throughout each year, with October nights on fresh straw feeling almost luxurious compared to the compressed musty bedding they endured by the following September. Different monasteries developed varying approaches to mattress construction, based on local resources and theological interpretation. Some communities used rush mats woven from wetland plants, providing slightly more cushioning than pure straw. Others experimented with layered systems, coarse materials at the bottom for durability, finer substances on top for minimal comfort. The strictest orders forbade any padding beyond basic straw, while more lenient communities allowed thin wool blankets between the straw and the monk's body. The psychological impact of deliberately uncomfortable sleeping arrangements can't be underestimated. Modern sleep research shows that comfort levels directly affect dream content and sleep quality, and medieval monks were essentially programming themselves for specific types of rest. Their sparse bedding promoted lighter, more fragmented sleep patterns that made awakening for night prayers easier, while preventing the kind of deep unconsciousness that might make them miss the bells calling them to worship. Historians still argue whether the discomfort was entirely intentional or partly economic necessity. Medieval monasteries operated on tight budgets, and providing comfortable bedding for dozens of monks would have required significant resources that might be better spent on charitable works or community needs. Some scholars suggest that theological justifications for uncomfortable sleeping were developed partly to rationalize what communities could afford rather than what they ideally wanted to provide. The straw mattress also served practical functions beyond sleep. During daylight hours, the bedding could be easily moved and reconfigured for cleaning or other activities. The lightweight modular nature of straw-filled mattresses made them ideal for communities that needed to adapt their living spaces for different purposes throughout the day. Unlike heavy permanent bedding systems, monastic mattresses could be quickly cleared away when dormitories needed to serve other functions. Maintenance of these deliberately uncomfortable beds required constant attention. Straw needed to be turned and fluffed regularly to prevent complete compression, though too much fluffing could make the surface unacceptably soft by monastic standards. Monks developed techniques for managing their bedding that balanced durability with appropriate austerity, ensuring their mattresses would last through the winter while maintaining the requisite level of discomfort. The health implications of sleeping on such firm surfaces were well understood by medieval monastics, who viewed the physical challenges as beneficial rather than harmful. They believed that soft bedding corrupted both body and soul, making people weak and promoting sinful thoughts. The hard sleeping surface was thought to strengthen character, while preventing the physical softness that might lead to spiritual weakness. Modern orthopedic research might actually support some of these claims about firm sleeping surfaces, though medieval monks weren't motivated by spinal health considerations. Some monasteries recorded specific rules about mattress thickness and material composition, indicating that even within the framework of deliberate discomfort, there were standards to maintain. Too little padding could cause injury, while too much approached the dangerous territory of luxury. The perfect monastic mattress provided just enough cushioning to prevent harm, while ensuring that every night's sleep remained a conscious act of spiritual discipline rather than physical indulgence. The chapter house represents the monastery's single concession to human thermal needs, a room where actual warmth exists, where your fingers can function normally, and where the concept of comfortable breathing becomes reality rather than distant memory. This heated chamber, typically reserved for community meetings and administrative business, transforms into an unofficial warming station, where monks gather between prayers, lingering as long as duties permit, while their bodies remember what it feels like to exist without constant shivering. The room's warmth comes from a proper fireplace or brazier, creating the kind of heat that penetrates wool robes and reaches all the way to your bones. Medieval monasteries typically maintained only 1 or 2 heated spaces throughout the entire complex, making strategic decisions about where to concentrate their limited fuel resources for maximum community benefit. The chapter house served multiple functions: morning meetings, disciplinary hearings, business discussions. But its most vital role during winter months was providing a thermal refuge where monks could restore their core body temperature between the frozen chapel services and the barely warmer dormitory. Without this warming opportunity, the constant cycle of prayer and sleep in unheated spaces would have been genuinely life-threatening for many community members. The ritual of gathering around the chapter house fire became as important as any religious observance, though it was never acknowledged as such in official monastery records. Monks would arrive from matins with their robes stiff from chapel frost, positioning themselves in carefully observed hierarchies around the heat source. Senior monks claimed the closest positions, while novices learned patience by warming themselves with reflected heat from stone walls that had absorbed the fire's energy. The social dynamics of shared warmth created unspoken protocols that governed everything from arrival timing to departure etiquette. But here's where medieval engineering reveals its sophisticated understanding of heat distribution. The chapter house was often positioned at the architectural centre of the monastery complex, allowing its warmth to radiate into adjacent rooms and corridors. Stone walls surrounding the heated chamber absorbed thermal energy during the day and released it gradually throughout the night, creating zones of relative warmth that extended the fire's influence far beyond the room itself. Monks learned to position themselves along these warm corridors whenever possible, turning architectural heat leakage into survival strategy. The chapter house fire required careful management of precious fuel resources, with designated monks responsible for maintaining optimal burning conditions throughout the winter months. Wood had to be seasoned properly. Fires built with specific techniques to maximize heat output, while minimizing smoke, and ember beds maintained consistently to provide steady warmth rather than dramatic temperature fluctuations. The brother assigned to fire tending became one of the most important community members, though his role was rarely celebrated in the same way as more obviously spiritual duties. Some monasteries developed sophisticated heating schedules that coordinated the chapter house fire with the community's daily rhythm. The room would be heated before dawn prayers, allowing monks to warm themselves after returning from the frozen chapel. Additional heating periods might coincide with afternoon study time or evening community meetings, creating reliable thermal opportunities that helped monks survive the harshest months. These schedules required careful planning and resource allocation, balancing warmth needs against available fuel supplies. The psychological impact of the chapter house warmth extended far beyond physical comfort. Having a guaranteed warm space created hope during the darkest winter months, providing a psychological anchor that helped monks endure the brutal sleeping conditions and frozen prayer services. The knowledge that relief was available even temporarily made the constant cold more bearable and prevented the despair that could accompany months of unrelenting thermal stress. Historians still argue whether heated chapter houses represented practical necessity or spiritual compromise. Some scholars point to theological texts that criticized any concession to physical comfort, suggesting that truly devout communities should have endured winter without any heating at all. Others note that monastery rules consistently mention the need to preserve life and health, indicating that basic warmth was considered compatible with spiritual discipline when managed appropriately. The chapter house also served as a medical facility during extreme weather events, where hypothermic monks could be warmed back to life and circulation restored to frostbitten extremities. Emergency protocols existed for treating monks who had spent too long in unheated spaces, with the warm room functioning as a primitive intensive care unit where body temperature could be gradually restored under careful supervision. Some monasteries maintained special warming procedures for elderly or sick monks who might not survive prolonged exposure to the standard cold conditions. The social dynamics of shared warmth in the chapter house created unexpected community bonding opportunities. Monks who rarely interacted during normal duties found themselves shoulder to shoulder around the fire, sharing not just heat, but also quiet conversation and mutual support. These informal gatherings helped strengthen community ties while providing emotional warmth that complemented the physical benefits of the heated space. But access to the chapter house warmth also created potential sources of conflict within monastic communities. Questions arose about fair distribution of warming time, appropriate behavior around the fire, and whether seeking thermal comfort represented spiritual weakness. Some monasteries developed explicit rules governing chapter house use, while others relied on community self-regulation to manage access to their most precious resource during winter months. The engineering of chapter house heating systems represented some of medieval technology's most sophisticated achievements. Proper chimney design, efficient firebox construction, and strategic air circulation required expertise that many monasteries developed through generations of trial and error. The best heated chapter houses became models that other communities tried to replicate, spreading thermal technologies throughout the medieval Christian world. The monastery kitchen becomes your secret salvation, a thermal oasis where bread ovens radiate life-saving heat, long after the day's baking has finished, and where lingering near the massive stone hearths isn't just permitted but practically encouraged under the guise of dawn prayer preparation. This isn't officially acknowledged as a warming strategy. Monasteries didn't admit that their monks needed to steal heat like medieval thermal refugees. But every brother knows that the minutes spent arranging communion bread or organizing the day's meal supplies provide precious opportunities to absorb residual warmth from cooking fires that burned throughout the night. Medieval monastery kitchens were engineering marvels designed for efficient food production, but their massive thermal mass created unintended heating systems that proved crucial for winter survival. The enormous bread ovens, built from thick stone and designed to retain heat for hours after firing, continued radiating warmth throughout the early morning hours when monks were most vulnerable to hypothermia. These ovens could maintain internal temperatures above 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 hours or more, making the kitchen the warmest space in the entire monastery complex during the critical pre-dawn period. The timing of kitchen warming opportunities aligned perfectly with the monastic schedule, creating what amounted to a thermal lifeline between night prayers and morning duties. After completing the frozen ordeal of matins in the chapel, monks could legitimately visit the kitchen to prepare materials for the day's liturgical needs, arranging altar breads, organizing meal supplies, or consulting with the kitchen brothers about community needs. These visits provided crucial warming intervals that helped restore circulation and core body temperature before returning to unheated spaces. But here's where medieval monks demonstrated their genius for survival. Through religious justification, kitchen warming became integrated into spiritual practice through dawn prayer rituals that coincidentally positioned monks near heat sources. The practice of private prayer while standing near warm ovens wasn't considered thermal opportunism, but rather contemplative meditation, enhanced by the symbolic warmth of divine presence. This theological creativity allowed monks to seek life-saving heat while maintaining their vows of austerity and spiritual discipline. The kitchen staff, typically lay brothers rather than ordained monks, understood their role as unofficial guardians of community thermal welfare. They timed their baking schedules to ensure maximum oven heat. During the coldest pre-dawn hours, positioned workspace activities near heat sources, where visiting monks could legitimately linger, and maintained ember beds that could provide consistent warmth throughout the night. These brothers became thermal engineers disguised as food preparers, managing heat resources as carefully as they managed food supplies. Some monasteries developed sophisticated heat recovery systems that captured and redistributed kitchen warmth throughout adjacent areas. Stone floors beneath ovens absorbed thermal energy and radiated it into surrounding rooms, while carefully designed air circulation systems carried warm air through corridors and into nearby chambers. The kitchen became the heart of a primitive but effective heating network that extended its warming influence far beyond the food preparation areas. The social dynamics of kitchen warming created informal hierarchies that operated alongside official monastic rankings. Senior monks could claim the closest positions to heat sources, while novices learned patience by warming themselves with secondary heat from heated walls and floors. Kitchen duties became coveted assignments during winter months, not because the work was easier, but because the thermal benefits made the harsh living conditions significantly more bearable. Historians still argue whether kitchen warming was officially sanctioned or represented unofficial community adaptation to harsh living conditions. Monastery rules rarely mention thermal comfort explicitly, but surviving records indicate that kitchen assignments often went to the most cold-sensitive community members, elderly monks, those recovering from illness, or brothers whose constitutions couldn't handle prolonged exposure to unheated spaces. This suggests that abbots understood and tacitly approved of kitchen warming as a survival strategy. The bread ovens themselves required careful management to balance food production needs with thermal resource distribution. Firing schedules had to coordinate baking requirements with community warming needs, ensuring that maximum heat was available during the coldest parts of the night, while maintaining sufficient temperatures for food preparation throughout the day. This complex scheduling required expertise that kitchen brothers developed through years of experience with both culinary and thermal management. The kitchen also served as an emergency warming facility during extreme weather events, where hypothermic monks could be brought for rapid rewarming. Emergency protocols existed for treating severe cold exposure with kitchen staff trained to recognize symptoms of dangerous heat loss and provide appropriate thermal intervention. The combination of radiant heat from ovens and warm food or beverages could restore core body temperature more effectively than any other available medieval technology. But kitchen warming also created potential spiritual conflicts for communities committed to austerity and suffering as paths to salvation. Some theological perspectives viewed seeking physical comfort as spiritual weakness, creating tension between survival needs and religious ideals. Monasteries had to balance theological purity against practical requirements for keeping their communities alive through brutal winter conditions. The integration of kitchen warming into dawn prayer routines created beautiful moments of spiritual and physical restoration that modern comfort seekers might envy. Picture yourself standing near massive stone ovens while reciting morning prayers, feeling life-saving heat penetrate your frozen robes while your spirit prepares for another day of service. The warmth becomes part of the prayer itself, a physical manifestation of divine care that makes theological sense within medieval understanding of God's providence for those who serve faithfully. The monastery cats slip through shadows like furry agents of thermal salvation, their sleek bodies radiating precious heat as they weave between sleeping monks with the confident authority of creatures who understand survival better than any human theologian. These aren't official monastery residents. No medieval religious rule explicitly mentions cats as legitimate members of monastic communities, but they occupy an essential ecological niche as both pest controllers and inadvertent heating systems, providing warmth that often means the difference between comfortable sleep and dangerous hypothermia during the brutal winter months. Medieval monasteries attracted cats naturally through their grain stores, food preparation areas, and general abundance of mice that thrived in communities where breadcrumbs and stored provisions created rodent paradise. But the monks quickly discovered that these feline immigrants offered thermal benefits that transformed them from tolerated pest controllers into unofficial heating equipment with purrs, whiskers, and an uncanny ability to locate the warmest spots in any sleeping arrangement. A cat curled against your ribs provides about as much heat as a moderately warm stone, but with the added benefit of adjusting its position throughout the night to maximize warmth distribution. The cat's natural behavior patterns aligned perfectly with monastic thermal needs, as these nocturnal creatures remained active during the coldest nighttime hours when monks were most vulnerable to heat loss. While human body temperatures dropped during sleep, cats maintained their normal warmth, essentially serving as biological heating pads that could detect and respond to their human companions' thermal requirements. A monk shivering in his sleep might find a cat pressed against his back by morning, having unconsciously attracted the animal through his need for warmth. But here's where medieval monasteries revealed their pragmatic approach to survival. Cats were never officially acknowledged as heating systems, but their presence was carefully managed to maximize their thermal benefits to the community. Kitchen brothers learned to feed cats at specific times and locations that encouraged them to sleep near the dormitories. Monastery layouts often included cat-accessible routes that allowed feline movement throughout the complex while maintaining the appearance of spontaneous animal behavior rather than deliberate thermal management. Some monasteries developed informal protocols for cat-monk relationships that operated alongside official religious rules. Sick or elderly monks might find cats consistently choosing to sleep near them, apparently drawn by elevated body temperatures, but actually providing crucial thermal support for community members most vulnerable to cold-related illness. Novices learn to appreciate feline companionship, not just for emotional comfort, but for the practical warmth that could make harsh initiation periods more bearable. The theological implications of cat companionship created interesting challenges for communities committed to austerity and spiritual discipline. Some religious authorities viewed attachment to animals as potential distraction from divine focus, while others recognized cats as part of God's creation, designed to serve human needs. Most monasteries resolved this tension by treating cats as tools rather than companions, acknowledging their practical value while avoiding emotional attachment that might compromise spiritual priorities. Cat behavior during extreme weather provided early warning systems for dangerous cold conditions that could threaten human survival. When monastery cats began clustering together in unusual numbers or seeking shelter in normally avoided areas, experienced monks recognized these signs as indicators of potentially life-threatening temperature drops. The animals' superior cold sensitivity allowed them to detect thermal dangers before humans realized they were in immediate risk. Historians still argue whether cats were deliberately encouraged or simply tolerated in medieval monasteries. Surviving records rarely mention cats explicitly, but indirect evidence suggests that many communities recognized their value and took measures to ensure adequate feline populations throughout winter months. Some monasteries may have actually traded cats with other communities to maintain optimal thermal support during the harshest seasonal periods. The purring mechanism that cats use for communication and self-healing also provided acoustic benefits that enhanced sleep quality in cold dormitories. Modern research shows that cat purrs produce frequencies that promote relaxation and pain relief in humans, and medieval monks intuitively understood that sleeping near purring cats improved their rest quality, despite harsh physical conditions. The gentle vibration and rhythmic sound created white noise that masked disruptive environmental sounds while providing tactile comfort. Different cat breeds and individual animals developed reputations within monastery communities for their thermal effectiveness and sleeping habits. Larger long-haired cats were particularly valued for their heat output, while smaller cats might be appreciated for their ability to curl into tight spaces and provide localized warming for specific body parts. Some monasteries may have selectively encouraged breeding that produced cats with optimal warming characteristics. The seasonal patterns of cat behavior aligned with monastery thermal needs, as cats naturally sought warmer sleeping locations during cold months, while requiring less human contact during milder weather. This natural adaptation meant that cats provided maximum thermal benefits precisely when monks needed them most, while reducing potential spiritual distractions during periods when survival wasn't the primary concern. But cat companionship also created practical challenges for monastic communities. Cats required food resources that competing with human needs during difficult periods, and their presence could complicate hygiene and health management in close-quarters living situations. Some cats might disturb sleep through nocturnal activities, while others could become territorial or aggressive in ways that disrupted community harmony. The emotional bonds that inevitably developed between monks and cats created unacknowledged sources of comfort that help many community members endure the psychological challenges of harsh winter isolation. Having a warm living creature choose to share your cold bed provided emotional warmth that complemented the physical benefits, creating holistic support systems that addressed both body and spirit during the most challenging months of monastic life. The monastery infirmary becomes a liquid lifeline when herb gardens yield their aromatic treasures for hot teas that transform cold-stunned monks into temporarily warmed human beings, one careful sip at a time. Brother Infirmarian knows secrets of thermal medicine that would make modern baristas weep with envy. How to brew chamomile tea that radiates warmth through frozen limbs, how to prepare mint infusions that clear respiratory passages blocked by constant cold breathing, and how to time these precious hot drinks to provide maximum warming benefits during the most dangerous nighttime hours. Medieval monasteries maintained sophisticated herb gardens specifically for medicinal purposes, but winter brewing became as much about survival as healing. The infirmary's small brazier, justified as medical equipment rather than luxury heating, could heat water to temperatures that medieval monks experienced as miraculous warmth. A cup of genuinely hot liquid in January represented thermal wealth beyond anything gold could purchase, providing internal heating that penetrated cold-stiffened muscles and restored circulation to extremities that had gone dangerously numb during long prayer services. The timing of medicinal tea service aligned strategically with the monastery's thermal crisis points. After matins, when monks returned from frozen chapels, during the pre-dawn hours when body temperatures reached their lowest ebb, and before retiring to unheated dormitories where sleep would further reduce their core warmth. Brother Infirmarian developed unofficial protocols for providing medicinal warming beverages that addressed thermal emergencies without violating monastic rules about comfort and luxury. But here's where medieval medical knowledge reveals its sophisticated understanding of cold weather physiology. Specific herbs were selected not just for their healing properties, but for their ability to promote internal heat generation and circulation. Ginger root stimulated blood flow to extremities, cinnamon increased metabolic heat production, and fennel helped maintain digestive warmth that could sustain monks through long hours of cold exposure. These weren't just random herbal combinations, but carefully formulated thermal medicines designed to combat hypothermia through internal warming. The preparation rituals surrounding medicinal teas became forms of therapy that addressed both physical and psychological aspects of winter survival. The process of brewing, waiting for proper steeping and slowly consuming hot liquids, forced monks to pause, breathe deeply, and allow their bodies to absorb not just liquid warmth, but also the aromatic vapors that helped clear cold, congested respiratory systems. These moments of forced stillness provided mental restoration that complemented the physical warming effects. Some monasteries developed sophisticated tea scheduling systems that coordinated herb availability with community thermal needs throughout the winter season. Early winter called for milder warming herbs when monks' bodies were still adjusting to cold conditions, while the harshest months required stronger thermal stimulants that could counteract severe hypothermia risks. Spring transitions needed herbs that helped bodies readjust to warmer conditions without losing the cold weather resilience they had developed. The social dynamics of shared tea consumption created informal warming circles where monks could gather around the infirmary brazier while justifying their presence through concern for community health. These gatherings provided opportunities for thermal cooperation, sharing body heat while consuming warming beverages that multiplied the benefits of both heat sources. Brother Infirmarian often encouraged these communal tea sessions as medical interventions that prevented more serious cold-related illnesses. Historians still argue whether medicinal tea services were primarily therapeutic or represented creative solutions to monastic heating restrictions. Surviving infirmary records document extensive herb usage during winter months, but the language carefully emphasizes medical rather than comfort purposes. This suggests that communities understood the thermal benefits while maintaining theological justifications that kept tea service within acceptable bounds of monastic austerity. The herbs themselves required careful cultivation and preservation to ensure adequate winter supplies when fresh warming plants weren't available. Monastery gardens dedicated significant space to thermal medicinal plants, with brothers learning specialized techniques for drying, storing, and preparing herbs that would retain their warming properties throughout the coldest months. Some monasteries developed reputations for producing particularly effective warming teas that other communities sought to trade for or replicate. The brewing techniques developed in monastery infirmaries represented some of medieval Europe's most advanced understanding of herbal extraction and thermal preparation. Brother Infirmarian learned to optimize water temperatures, steeping times, and herb combinations to maximize both medicinal and warming effects. These skills required years of experience and careful observation of how different monks responded to various herbal preparations under different thermal stress conditions. But medicinal tea service also created resource management challenges for monasteries operating on limited budgets and strict resource allocation systems. Herbs required cultivation, space, processing time, and fuel for heating water, all precious commodities that had to be balanced against other community needs. Some monasteries could afford extensive tea programs, while others rationed warming beverages only for the most serious thermal emergencies. The psychological impact of hot tea service extended far beyond its physical warming effects, providing hope and comfort during the most psychologically challenging aspects of winter survival. The knowledge that warm liquid relief was available helped monks endure cold conditions that might otherwise have seemed unbearable, while the ritual of tea preparation and consumption created structured moments of self-care within the harsh framework of monastic discipline. Different herbs provided varying thermal experiences that Brother Infirmarian learned to match with specific monks' needs and conditions. Elderly monks might receive gentle warming teas that promoted circulation without overstimulating weakened cardiovascular systems, while robust younger monks could handle stronger thermal stimulants that generated more dramatic internal heating effects. This personalized approach to thermal medicine represented sophisticated understanding of individual physiological differences and cold weather vulnerability patterns. The scriptorium transforms into an unlikely thermal sanctuary, where monks huddle around tiny charcoal braziers, ostensibly warming their hands to prevent ink from freezing but actually stealing precious moments of life-saving heat while copying sacred manuscripts. This isn't officially acknowledged as a heating strategy. Monasteries maintain the fiction that braziers existed solely to keep writing materials functional. But every brother who spent winter hours bent over illuminated manuscripts understood that the scriptorium offered some of the monastery's most reliable warmth, carefully rationed and jealously guarded by those fortunate enough to draw copying assignments. Medieval manuscript production required specific temperature conditions that happened to align perfectly with human thermal needs, creating legitimate justification for heating systems that would otherwise violate monastic austerity principles. Ink literally froze in winter scriptoriums, making writing impossible without some form of warming technology. Parchment became brittle and could crack when exposed to extreme cold, potentially destroying months of careful work. These practical requirements meant that scriptorium heating was framed as preservation of sacred texts, rather than comfort for monks, allowing communities to maintain warmth while preserving their theological commitment to suffering. The tiny charcoal braziers used in scriptoriums represented sophisticated medieval heating technology designed to provide concentrated warmth without creating fire hazards among valuable manuscripts and flammable writing materials. These small metal containers, often no larger than modern coffee mugs, could generate surprising amounts of heat when properly managed with carefully selected charcoal that burned cleanly and consistently. Brother Librarian learned to tend these mini-furnaces with expertise that rivaled professional smiths, maintaining optimal temperatures that kept both ink and fingers functional throughout long winter copying sessions. But here's where medieval monks revealed their genius for thermal optimization within religious constraints. Scriptorium work assignments during winter months became coveted positions that provided legitimate access to heating systems unavailable elsewhere in the monastery. The most skilled scribes and illuminators naturally claimed the warmest positions closest to braziers, but even monks assigned to basic copying tasks could benefit from residual heat that made scriptorium duty significantly more comfortable than most other winter activities. The positioning of workstations around heat sources created informal hierarchies that operated alongside official scriptorium rankings. Senior scribes claimed the closest brazier positions, while novice copyists learned patience and penmanship, while working in the thermal margins where heat was barely perceptible. These arrangements taught valuable lessons about monastic discipline, while ensuring that the most valuable manuscript work was completed under optimal warming conditions that prevented mistakes caused by cold, stiffened fingers. Some scriptoriums developed sophisticated heat distribution systems that maximized the warming potential of their limited brazier resources. Stone floors absorbed and redistributed heat from charcoal containers, while careful positioning of work tables created heat circulation patterns that benefited multiple copyists from single heat sources. Brothers learned to work in coordinated shifts that maintained brazier temperatures while allowing maximum numbers of monks to benefit from scriptorium warmth throughout the day. The timing of scriptorium work aligned strategically with monastery thermal management, providing warming opportunities during the coldest parts of winter days when other heated spaces weren't available. Morning copying sessions allowed monks to warm themselves after frozen chapel services, while afternoon manuscript work provided thermal refuge during the coldest hours before evening prayers. This scheduling created reliable warming opportunities that helped monks survive harsh winter conditions while maintaining productivity in sacred text reproduction. Historians still argue whether scriptorium heating was primarily practical necessity or represented theological compromise with comfort restrictions. Surviving monastery records justify brazier use exclusively in terms of manuscript preservation, rather than human thermal needs, but the elaborate heat management systems developed in many scriptoriums suggest that communities understood and deliberately optimized the human warming benefits of their writing equipment. The social dynamics of shared scriptorium warming created unexpected community bonding opportunities among monks who might otherwise have limited interaction during their regular duties. Working shoulder to shoulder around small heat sources fostered collaboration and mutual support that strengthened monastic bonds while providing shared thermal benefits. Brothers learned to coordinate their movements to maximize heat access, while maintaining the productive workflow that justified their presence in the warm space. Charcoal management for scriptorium braziers required sophisticated understanding of fuel properties and burning characteristics that some monks developed into specialized expertise. The best charcoal burned cleanly without producing smoke that could damage manuscripts while providing consistent heat that lasted throughout long copying sessions. Brothers responsible for brazier maintenance became thermal engineers whose skills were as valuable to community survival as their more obviously spiritual duties. But scriptorium heating also created resource allocation challenges for monasteries, managing limited fuel supplies and strict budget constraints. Charcoal was expensive and had to be purchased or produced using monastery resources that competed with other community needs. Some monasteries could afford extensive scriptorium heating, while others rationed warmth only for the most essential manuscript work, creating disparities in thermal comfort that reflected economic rather than spiritual hierarchies. The manuscripts themselves benefited from thermal management in ways that justified heating expenses beyond immediate human comfort considerations. Consistent temperatures prevented parchment deterioration, ink quality problems, and binding failures that could destroy years of careful work. The investment in scriptorium heating represented long-term preservation strategy that protected valuable intellectual and spiritual resources while providing crucial thermal benefits for the monks who created them. The psychology of scriptorium warming provided hope and motivation during the most challenging winter months when monks could look forward to copying assignments that offered legitimate access to warmth and comfort. The knowledge that thermal relief was available through productive work helped maintain morale and community functionality during periods when simple survival might otherwise have consumed all available energy and attention. The guest house stands as a monument to medieval social hierarchy, where visiting nobles sleep under additional woolen blankets and enjoy the luxury of braziers in their chambers, while monks across the courtyard practice their vows of thermal austerity in dormitories that barely qualify as warmer than outdoor camping. This isn't hypocrisy, it's survival economics disguised as hospitality, because monasteries depended on wealthy patrons for funding, and frozen guests didn't typically make generous donations to communities that had allowed them to experience hypothermia during their spiritual retreats. Medieval guest house accommodations reveal the careful balance monasteries maintained between religious ideals and practical necessity. Visiting nobles, church officials, and wealthy merchants received heated chambers, comfortable bedding and warming amenities that would have been considered sinful luxury if provided to the monks themselves. These guest quarters often featured proper fireplaces, multiple wool blankets, and even heated stones placed in beds, thermal comforts that demonstrated exactly how warm monastery buildings could be when communities chose to prioritize comfort over spiritual discipline. The contrast between guest house warmth and monastic austerity created fascinating studies in medieval thermal inequality. A visiting bishop might sleep in chambers heated to genuinely comfortable temperatures, while the monks serving him endured their traditional frozen dormitory conditions. This disparity wasn't accidental, but represented deliberate policy designed to attract and retain the wealthy supporters whose donations funded monastery operations, including the fuel and resources necessary to maintain even the limited heating systems available to the religious community. But here's where medieval monasteries revealed their sophisticated understanding of thermal diplomacy. Guest house heating served as advertisement for the community's capability and resources, demonstrating that monastic austerity was voluntary rather than imposed by poverty. Wealthy visitors who experienced excellent hospitality were more likely to provide financial support, fund building projects, or recommend the monastery to other potential benefactors. The investment in guest comfort represented long-term strategy for community survival and growth. The guest house staff, typically drawn from lay brothers rather than ordained monks, developed expertise in luxury thermal management that contrasted sharply with their own living conditions. These brothers learned to maintain proper fireplaces, prepare heated stones for guest beds, and coordinate warming services that provided visiting nobles with thermal comfort, approaching modern hotel standards. Their skills in guest thermal management represented sophisticated hospitality technology that required training and experience to execute effectively. Some monasteries developed elaborate guest house heating systems that showcased medieval engineering capabilities while providing thermal experiences that impressed visiting dignitaries. Guest chambers might feature underfloor heating systems, wall-mounted braziers, and coordinated warming protocols that ensured comfortable temperatures throughout visitors' stays. These systems required significant resource investment, but generated returns through increased donations and political support from satisfied guests. The timing of guest house services created additional thermal management challenges, for monasteries already struggling to heat essential community spaces. Providing comfortable guest accommodations required fuel resources that might otherwise have been used to heat chapter houses, scriptoriums, or other monk-occupied areas. This resource allocation forced communities to make difficult decisions about thermal priorities that balance guest satisfaction against community needs. Historians still argue whether guest house heating represented necessary hospitality or excessive accommodation that violated monastic principles. Some theological authorities criticize communities that provided guests with comforts unavailable to their own monks, while others defended hospitality as essential Christian duty that required appropriate welcome for visitors. Most monasteries resolved this tension by framing guest heating as necessary for attracting the resources needed to support their spiritual mission. The social dynamics of guest house warmth created complex relationships between visitors and monks that reflected broader medieval hierarchies. Wealthy guests might express appreciation for monastic hospitality while remaining oblivious to the thermal sacrifices their comfort required from the serving community. Some visitors developed genuine concern for monastic welfare and provided additional donations specifically for community heating, while others treated warm accommodation as natural entitlement. Guest house heating technology often represented the most advanced thermal systems available in monastery complexes, serving as testing grounds for innovations that might eventually be adapted for community use. Successful guest house heating solutions could demonstrate the feasibility of expanded warming systems, while guest feedback provided valuable information about thermal effectiveness and resource requirements for larger-scale heating projects. But guest house operations also created staff assignment opportunities that provided monks with legitimate access to heated spaces through their service duties. Brothers assigned to guest house maintenance, meal service, or hospitality coordination could benefit from residual warmth while performing their assigned tasks. These positions became coveted assignments during winter months, though the additional work requirements often offset the thermal benefits. The psychology of guest house thermal inequality created complex emotions within monastic communities, where brothers could observe comfortable heating systems while maintaining their own commitment to austerity. Some monks found inspiration in providing comfort they chose to forego themselves, while others struggled with resentment about thermal disparities that seemed to contradict Christian ideals of equality and shared sacrifice. The guest house also served as emergency thermal refuge during extreme weather events, when monastery heating systems proved inadequate for community survival. During severe cold snaps, abbots might authorize the use of guest house facilities for hypothermic monks, temporarily suspending normal thermal restrictions to prevent deaths. These emergency protocols demonstrated that communities understood the difference between voluntary austerity and life-threatening exposure. Different monasteries developed varying approaches to guest house thermal management, based on their primary patron relationships and financial resources. Communities serving wealthy nobility might maintain elaborate heating systems year-round, while monasteries with more modest support networks provided basic comfort during specific seasons or for particular types of visitors. The monastery infirmary operates under different thermal rules, entirely where sick brothers receive what amounts to medieval luxury heating: extra wool blankets, heated stones tucked against fevered bodies, and braziers that burn continuously without theological justification required. This isn't spiritual weakness, it's medical necessity disguised as mercy, because even the most austere religious communities understood that freezing to death prevented recovery from illnesses that might otherwise be survivable with proper thermal support and careful nursing care. Medieval monastic infirmaries represented sophisticated medical facilities that acknowledged the crucial relationship between body temperature and healing capacity. Brother Infirmarian learned through experience that patients recovering from pneumonia, broken bones, or digestive ailments healed faster and more completely when provided with adequate warmth, making thermal comfort a legitimate medical intervention rather than spiritual compromise. Sick monks received heated stones placed against their feet, additional wool coverings, and sometimes even heated chambers that would have been considered sinful luxury for healthy community members. The medical justification for infirmary heating created opportunities for thermal innovations that couldn't be implemented elsewhere in the monastery without violating austerity principles. Heated stone therapy involved warming large rocks in kitchen fires and wrapping them in cloth before placing them against patients' bodies, providing hours of sustained warmth that could maintain patient body temperature throughout cold nights. This primitive but effective heating technology required careful temperature management to prevent burns while maximizing therapeutic warming benefits. But here's where medieval medical knowledge reveals its sophisticated understanding of thermal therapy. Specific heating protocols were developed for different types of illnesses and patient conditions. Fever patients might receive cooling rather than warming treatments, while hypothermic patients required gradual rewarming to prevent shock. Elderly monks with circulation problems benefited from sustained gentle heat, while younger patients recovering from injuries needed thermal support that promoted healing without encouraging excessive rest that might weaken their recovery. The infirmary braziers burned continuously during winter months justified as essential medical equipment rather than comfort heating. These warming devices provided not just ambient heat, but also the ability to prepare warm beverages, heat medicinal preparations, and maintain therapeutic tools at proper temperatures. Brother Infirmarian became expert at managing multiple heat sources, simultaneously balancing fuel consumption against patient thermal needs while maintaining safety protocols that prevented fires in spaces filled with flammable bedding and medical supplies. Some infirmaries developed sophisticated patient heating systems that coordinated multiple thermal technologies for maximum therapeutic benefit. Heated stone rotation schedules ensured that patients received continuous warmth throughout day and night cycles, while brazier positioning created optimal temperature zones for different types of medical conditions. These systems required careful planning and resource management but could provide thermal environments that approached genuinely comfortable temperatures for patients whose healing depended on adequate warmth. The timing of infirmary thermal services aligned with medical rather than monastic schedules, allowing for heating protocols that prioritized patient needs over community thermal restrictions. Sick monks might receive heated stones in the middle of the night when their conditions worsened, or additional warming during temperature spikes that indicated serious illness progression. This medical flexibility created thermal opportunities unavailable elsewhere in the monastery complex. Historians still argue whether infirmary heating represented genuine medical necessity or provided convenient justification for thermal comfort that violated monastic principles. Surviving medical texts from medieval monasteries emphasize the therapeutic importance of proper patient warming, but some theological authorities questioned whether such comfort might actually impede spiritual growth through suffering. Most communities resolved this tension by maintaining strict medical criteria for thermal treatments, while ensuring that genuinely sick monks received adequate healing support. The social dynamics of infirmary thermal privilege created complex relationships within monastic communities, where brothers could observe warming technologies while understanding that access required genuine illness rather than simple cold discomfort. Some monks may have exaggerated minor ailments to gain access to infirmary warmth, while others stoically endured serious conditions to avoid appearing weak or overly concerned with physical comfort. Infirmary heating also served as testing ground for thermal technologies that might eventually be adapted for broader community use. Successful patient warming protocols demonstrated the effectiveness of heated stones, optimal brazier management and thermal therapy techniques that could inform heating decisions for other monastery spaces. Brother Infirmarian often became the community's thermal expert, consulted on heating questions that extended beyond purely medical applications. But infirmary thermal management required significant resource allocation that competed with other monastery needs during periods when fuel and heating materials were scarce. Maintaining continuous warmth for sick patients demanded coal wood or other combustible materials that might otherwise have been rationed for essential community heating. These resource decisions forced abbots to balance individual medical needs against broader community thermal welfare. The psychology of infirmary warmth provided hope and comfort that extended beyond its direct medical benefits, offering sick monks emotional support that complemented their physical healing. The knowledge that thermal relief was available when genuinely needed helped healthy monks endure harsh conditions, while understanding that their community would provide appropriate care if they became seriously ill. The medical equipment maintained in heated infirmaries often represented the most advanced therapeutic technology available in medieval monasteries. Properly heated spaces allowed for the preparation of complex medicinal compounds, the maintenance of surgical instruments, and the storage of temperature-sensitive healing materials that required consistent thermal conditions to remain effective. Different illnesses required varying thermal management approaches that Brother Infirmarian learned through experience and consultation with visiting physicians. Respiratory conditions often benefited from warm, humid environments, created through steam therapy, while digestive ailments might require different heating protocols that promoted internal warming without excessive external temperature elevation. The midnight office bell tolls again, its metallic voice cutting through whatever fragmented sleep you've managed to achieve since the last prayer service, and suddenly you're stumbling through corridors for the second time in what feels like minutes, but represents the monastery's relentless commitment to dividing night into frozen fragments of rest and worship. This isn't just spiritual discipline, it's thermal torture disguised as devotion, where your body never gets the continuous rest needed to generate sustained warmth, and every awakening forces you to abandon whatever heat you've managed to accumulate under your thin wool blankets. Medieval monastic schedules divided the night into multiple prayer services that prevented the kind of deep sustained sleep that modern research shows is essential for maintaining body temperature and immune function. After matins at 2 a.m. you might return to bed for 2 or 3 hours before Lord's at dawn. But this fragmented rest pattern meant that your body never achieved the thermal equilibrium necessary for genuine recovery from daily cold exposure. Each awakening represented a thermal crisis as you lost the precious heat you generated during brief sleep periods. The second wake-up call often proved more challenging than the first, as your body had begun to relax into deeper sleep phases when the bell demanded another trek through frozen corridors to the chapel. By this point in the night, your energy reserves were depleted, your circulation sluggish, and your ability to generate body heat through movement significantly reduced. The midnight office became a test of thermal endurance that pushed many monks to the limits of their cold weather survival capacity. But here's where medieval monastic wisdom reveals its understanding of psychological resilience through repeated challenge. The multiple night services created graduated exposure to extreme cold that gradually built monks' tolerance for thermal stress. Like altitude training for mountain climbers, repeated exposure to dangerous cold conditions during vulnerable sleep periods built physiological adaptations that increase survival capacity over time. Monks who endured multiple winters developed enhanced circulation, improved cold tolerance and mental toughness that helped them function under conditions that might have killed less experienced community members. The strategic timing of multiple night services also served practical heating purposes, as movement and prayer generated body heat during the most dangerous hours, when stationary sleep would have allowed core temperatures to drop to potentially fatal levels. By forcing monks to wake up, walk, stand, and chant during the coldest pre-dawn hours, the schedule provided thermal protection disguised as spiritual discipline. The physical activity of prayer services literally kept monks warm enough to survive until sunrise. Some monasteries developed sophisticated scheduling systems that balanced spiritual requirements against thermal survival needs, adjusting the timing and duration of night services based on seasonal temperature conditions. During the coldest months, prayer services might be shortened to minimize exposure time, while milder weather allowed for longer, more elaborate worship that provided additional warming through extended physical activity. The sleep fragmentation caused by multiple night services created unique challenges for monks' thermal regulation systems. Interrupted sleep prevented the deep rest phases when bodies naturally reduce metabolic activity, and core temperature potentially providing protection against excessive heat loss during extended cold exposure. However, sleep deprivation also reduced the body's ability to generate and maintain warmth, creating a complex balance between protection and vulnerability. Historians still argue whether the multiple night services were primarily spiritual practice or represented practical survival strategy, adapted to harsh medieval living conditions. Some scholars point to similar schedules in monasteries located in warmer climates, suggesting that the timing was about prayer rather than thermal management. Others note that Northern European monasteries often developed more elaborate night service schedules than their southern counterparts, indicating adaptation to local environmental challenges. The community dynamics of repeated night awakening created shared experiences that bonded monks through collective endurance of challenging conditions. Everyone in the dormitory faced the same thermal ordeal, the same struggle to abandon warm beds for frozen chapels, and the same challenge of maintaining alertness and devotion despite cold-induced fatigue. This shared suffering created solidarity that helped individual monks endure conditions that might have been unbearable in isolation. The physical effects of sleep fragmentation combined with cold exposure created unique health challenges that medieval monasteries learned to manage through community support and medical intervention. Monks developed techniques for rapid warming upon returning to bed, methods for maintaining circulation during brief rest periods, and strategies for maximizing the thermal benefits of limited sleep time between services. But the multiple night services also provided psychological benefits that helped monks cope with the harsh realities of medieval winter survival. Having successfully completed one frozen prayer service provided confidence and momentum for facing subsequent challenges, while the regular rhythm of awakening and worship created structure that prevented the despair that might otherwise accompany endless cold nights. The midnight office represented the ultimate test of monastic commitment, as it required abandoning whatever comfort and warmth monks had achieved through their survival strategies and facing the night's coldest hour with nothing but faith and community support. Those who could endure the repeated midnight awakening demonstrated the physical and spiritual strength necessary for lifelong monastic vocation. Different monasteries developed varying approaches to managing the health impacts of fragmented sleep in cold conditions. Some communities allowed modified schedules for elderly or sick monks, while others maintained rigid requirements that treated thermal endurance as essential monastic discipline. These differences reflected varying theological interpretations of the relationship between physical suffering and spiritual growth. The acoustic environment of the midnight office created its own thermal challenges, as the unheated chapel amplified sounds that emphasized the cold conditions. Echoing footsteps on stone floors, the crack of timber contracting in freezing temperatures, and the collective breathing of monks whose exhalations created visible clouds in the frigid air. These sensory experiences reinforced the reality of their thermal challenges while providing shared reference points for community endurance. The covered walkways surrounding the monastery cloister become your salvation during the pre-dawn hours, where pacing these stone corridors in silent meditation generates precious body heat while maintaining the appearance of spiritual contemplation rather than desperate thermal management. These architectural features, designed to protect monks from rain and snow during outdoor prayer and meditation, transform into medieval fitness tracks, where circulation-boosting movement provides life-saving warmth, disguised as devotional exercise and contemplative walking that happens to prevent hypothermia. Medieval cloister design represented sophisticated understanding of the relationship between movement meditation and thermal regulation, creating covered spaces where monks could engage in physical activity that served both spiritual and survival purposes. The long straight corridors provided adequate distance for sustained walking that could raise heart rate and core body temperature, while the covered roof protected monks from precipitation that would have made outdoor movement dangerous during winter weather. These walkways became thermal lifelines that allowed for heat generation without violating monastic commitments to outdoor prayer and meditation. The timing of cloister walks aligned strategically with the monastery's thermal crisis points, providing warming opportunities when indoor heating wasn't available and outdoor exposure would have been dangerous. Dawn meditation walks allowed monks to generate body heat after returning from frozen chapel services, while afternoon contemplation provided thermal activity during the coldest daylight hours. Evening walks before retiring to unheated dormitories offered crucial warming that could help maintain body temperature through the early hours of sleep. But here's where medieval monastic wisdom reveals its integration of practical survival. With spiritual practice, the rhythmic walking required for effective heat generation naturally promoted the kind of meditative states that monastic traditions sought to cultivate. The steady pace necessary for warming circulation created breathing patterns that enhanced contemplative prayer, while the physical activity helped clear minds clouded by cold-induced fatigue. Walking meditation became thermal therapy that addressed both body and spirit simultaneously. The stone floors of cloister walkways, while cold to the touch, actually provided thermal benefits through their thermal mass properties. During sunny winter days, stone absorbed solar heat and retained it for hours after sunset, creating walking surfaces that remained slightly warmer than the ambient air temperature. Monks learned to time their walks to take advantage of these thermal resources, maximizing the heating benefits of their contemplative exercise through strategic scheduling. Some monasteries developed sophisticated walking meditation protocols that optimize both spiritual and thermal benefits of cloister movement. Specific pace recommendations ensured adequate heat generation without excessive exertion, while breathing techniques, coordinated with walking rhythms, promoted both warmth and contemplative focus. These protocols required careful development through experimentation, with different approaches to movement-based warming and spiritual practice. The social dynamics of group walking created opportunities for thermal cooperation, where monks could share body heat while maintaining the silence required for contemplative practice. Walking in small groups provided wind protection and shared warmth that made outdoor movement more tolerable during harsh weather, while the collective rhythm of group meditation enhanced both spiritual and thermal benefits of the exercise. Historians still argue whether cloister walking was primarily spiritual practice or represented practical adaptation to cold living conditions. Monastic rules consistently emphasize the contemplative benefits of walking meditation, but the elaborate protocols developed for optimal walking schedules suggest that communities understood and deliberately maximized the thermal benefits of their devotional movement practices. The architectural features of cloister design provided natural wind protection that made walking meditation feasible even during harsh winter weather. The covered walkways created microclimates that were significantly more comfortable than fully outdoor spaces, while still providing the fresh air and natural light that monastic traditions valued for contemplative practice. This architectural solution allowed for thermal management without compromising spiritual ideals about outdoor meditation. Seasonal variations in walking meditation schedules reflected sophisticated understanding of the relationship between weather conditions and thermal needs. Summer walking might focus on early morning or evening hours to avoid excessive heat, while winter schedules concentrated movement during the warmest daylight periods, when solar heating enhanced the thermal benefits of physical activity. But cloister walking also required careful management to prevent overexertion that could lead to sweating and subsequent dangerous heat loss when monks returned to unheated indoor spaces. Brothers responsible for community health learned to monitor walking activities and provide guidance about optimal activity levels that promoted warming without creating thermal risks through excessive perspiration. The psychology of movement-based warming provided hope and agency during the most challenging winter periods, when monks could actively generate heat rather than passively enduring cold conditions. The knowledge that thermal relief was available through their own efforts helped maintain morale and provided constructive activity during periods when simple survival might otherwise have consumed all available mental energy. Different monasteries developed varying approaches to integrating walking meditation with thermal management, based on their architectural resources and local climate conditions. Communities with extensive cloister systems could provide elaborate walking opportunities, while monasteries with limited covered space developed more concentrated movement protocols that maximized thermal benefits within available architectural constraints. The spiritual traditions surrounding walking meditation provided theological justification for thermal management activities that might otherwise have been viewed as excessive concern with physical comfort. By framing movement as devotional practice, monasteries could encourage life-saving thermal activity while maintaining their commitment to spiritual priorities over physical well-being. The coordination of walking meditation with other thermal management strategies created comprehensive warming protocols that addressed monks' survival needs through integrated approaches combining movement, breathing, and contemplative practice. These holistic systems represented sophisticated understanding of human thermal regulation that anticipated modern knowledge about the relationship between physical activity, mental state, and cold weather survival. The refectory becomes a temple of thermal salvation. During meal times, where hot porridge and warm ale provide internal heating that penetrates frozen limbs with life-saving liquid warmth, transforming simple monastery meals into sophisticated thermal medicine that addresses hypothermia through carefully timed nutrition designed to generate and maintain body heat from the inside out. This isn't just eating, it's strategic fuel consumption, where every spoonful of heated food represents a calculated investment in survival through internal combustion powered by digestive processes that create metabolic warmth. Medieval monastery kitchens understood the crucial relationship between food temperature and winter survival. developing meal preparation techniques that maximize the thermal benefits of communal dining while working within the constraints of limited fuel resources and religious dietary restrictions. Hot porridge made from oats or barley provided sustained internal warming that could maintain elevated core body temperature for hours after consumption, while warm ale served as liquid heating fuel that delivered immediate thermal relief to cold-stunned digestive systems that needed rapid warming to function properly. The timing of heated meals aligned strategically with the monastery's thermal crisis points, providing internal warming opportunities when monks were most vulnerable to dangerous heat loss. Dawn breakfast offered crucial warming after the frozen ordeal of morning prayers, while evening meals provided thermal preparation for the long night ahead in unheated dormitories. Midday meals during the coldest winter months often featured additional warming elements. Heated bread, warm beverages, or thermal preparations that helped monks maintain adequate body temperature through the day's harshest hours. But here's where medieval nutritional wisdom reveals its sophisticated understanding of thermal physiology. Specific foods were selected not just for their caloric content, but for their ability to generate internal heat through digestive processes. Oats and barley created sustained warming through complex carbohydrate metabolism, while small amounts of fat from animal sources provided concentrated thermal fuel that burned efficiently in cold-stressed bodies. Warm spices like ginger and cinnamon stimulated circulation and promoted heat distribution to extremities that might otherwise have suffered frostbite. The communal nature of refectory dining created opportunities for thermal cooperation, where shared body heat complemented the warming effects of hot food and beverages. Monks seated shoulder to shoulder around wooden tables shared not just meals, but also radiant body heat that made the dining experience significantly warmer than individual eating would have provided. The refectory became a temporary heating chamber, where food fellowship and shared warmth combined to create genuinely comfortable thermal conditions. Some monasteries developed sophisticated meal heating protocols that coordinated food preparation with optimal warming schedules throughout winter days. Kitchen brothers learned to time cooking activities so that the hottest foods were served when monks most needed internal warming, while residual heat from cooking fires provided ambient warming in dining areas that enhanced the thermal benefits of heated meals. These systems required careful planning and resource management, but could provide thermal support that helped entire communities survive harsh winter conditions. The psychological impact of hot meals extended far beyond their physical warming effects, providing comfort and hope during the most challenging aspects of winter survival. The knowledge that warm food was available helped monks endure cold conditions that might otherwise have seemed unbearable, while the ritual of communal dining created structured opportunities for social warmth that complemented the thermal benefits of heated nutrition. Historians still argue whether elaborate meal heating represented practical necessity or violated monastic principles about dietary simplicity and spiritual discipline. Surviving kitchen records document extensive fuel usage for food preparation during winter months, but the language carefully emphasizes nutritional rather than comfort purposes. This suggests that communities understood the thermal benefits while maintaining theological justifications that kept meal heating within acceptable bounds of monastic austerity. The kitchen staff responsible for meal preparation developed expertise in thermal cooking that required sophisticated understanding of fuel management, heat distribution, and food temperature optimization. Brother Cook learned to maintain optimal serving temperatures for different types of foods, coordinate heating schedules with dining times, and balance thermal benefits against resource limitations that constrained fuel availability during the coldest months. But meal heating also created resource allocation challenges for monasteries. Managing limited fuel supplies and strict budget constraints during winter months, when heating demands competed with other essential community needs. Providing hot meals required wood charcoal or other combustible materials that might otherwise have been used for heating other monastery spaces, forcing communities to make difficult decisions about thermal priorities. The social dynamics of heated meal service created informal hierarchies that reflected both practical considerations and traditional monastic rankings. Senior monks might receive the hottest portions while their food was at peak temperature, while novices learned patience by eating foods that had cooled slightly during service. These arrangements ensured that community leaders received optimal thermal benefits, while maintaining traditional respect patterns within monastery social structures. Different types of foods provided varying thermal experiences that kitchen staff learned to coordinate for maximum warming effectiveness throughout winter meal cycles. Thick porridges provided sustained internal heating, while warm beverages offered immediate thermal relief that could restore circulation to cold-numbed extremities. Hot bread fresh from ovens delivered both nutritional and thermal benefits that helped monks maintain energy levels needed for survival in harsh conditions. The preparation techniques used in monastery kitchens represented some of medieval Europe's most advanced understanding of thermal cooking methods designed to maximize food temperature while minimizing fuel consumption. These cooking skills required years of experience and careful observation of how different heating approaches affected both food quality and thermal effectiveness for cold weather nutrition. The integration of meal heating with other thermal management strategies created comprehensive warming protocols that addressed monks' survival needs through coordinated approaches, combining nutrition, internal heating, and strategic timing that optimized the thermal benefits of limited resources while maintaining community functionality during the most challenging winter months. The novice hazing begins not with deliberate cruelty, but with systematic exposure to the monastery's harshest sleeping conditions, where new monks learn endurance through carefully orchestrated thermal trials that transform soft young men into hardened winter survivors, capable of enduring conditions that would kill most medieval people. This isn't sadism disguised as spirituality, it's sophisticated survival training, where experienced monks gradually introduced newcomers to cold weather living techniques through progressively challenging thermal exposures that build resilience, while weeding out those who lack the physical constitution for lifelong monastic commitment. Medieval novice training programs understood that successful adaptation to monastery life required more than spiritual preparation. It demanded physical conditioning that could only be achieved through controlled exposure to the harsh realities of unheated dormitories, frozen prayer services, and minimal thermal comfort. New monks typically began their training during milder months, but their first winter represented the ultimate test of whether they possessed the stamina necessary for permanent monastic vocation. The survival rate provided brutal but accurate assessment of each candidate's suitability for communities where thermal endurance was literally a matter of life and death. The sleeping assignments for novices reflected deliberate strategies designed to maximize learning opportunities while providing adequate support to prevent actual fatalities during the adaptation process. New monks were typically placed between experienced brothers who could provide guidance about optimal sleeping positions, thermal management techniques, and emergency protocols for dangerous cold exposure. However, novices received the least favorable bed locations, closest to drafty doors, farthest from whatever heat sources existed, and in positions where they would experience the full impact of winter conditions without protective buffers. But here's where medieval monasteries reveal their sophisticated understanding of gradual conditioning. Novice thermal training followed carefully planned progressions that built cold tolerance systematically, rather than throwing new monks immediately into life-threatening situations. Early winter exposure might involve shorter periods in unheated spaces, additional bedding allowances, or modified schedules that provided warming opportunities unavailable to fully committed monks. As novices demonstrated adaptation, these supports were gradually removed until they could endure full community thermal standards. The social dynamics of novice thermal training created mentorship relationships, where experienced monks shared survival techniques while maintaining the challenging conditions necessary for proper conditioning. Senior brothers taught novices how to position their bodies for maximum heat retention, how to coordinate breathing patterns for optimal warmth generation, and how to recognize and respond to symptoms of dangerous heat loss that could indicate medical emergencies requiring immediate intervention. Some monasteries developed elaborate novice thermal curricula that included specific lessons about cold weather survival techniques, seasonal adaptation strategies, and emergency protocols for extreme weather events. These training programs recognized that successful monastery life required practical skills that couldn't be learned through prayer and meditation alone, demanding hands-on experience with thermal management that could only be acquired through controlled exposure to challenging conditions. The timing of novice training aligned with natural seasonal cycles that provided optimal learning opportunities while minimizing risks to inexperienced community members. New monks typically entered monasteries during spring or summer months, allowing several seasons of gradual adaptation before facing their first full winter. This timing gave novices opportunities to observe and learn from experienced monks while building physical conditioning necessary for cold weather survival. Historians still argue whether novice thermal training represented necessary practical education or excessive hazing that violated Christian principles of compassion and care for vulnerable community members. Surviving novice accounts describe both positive mentorship experiences and genuinely dangerous exposures that resulted in serious illness or injury. Most monasteries apparently balanced training requirements against safety concerns, though standards varied significantly between communities and individual supervising monks. The psychological impact of surviving novice thermal training created confidence and community bonding that helped new monks integrate successfully into established monastery social structures. Those who endured their first winter earned respect and acceptance from experienced brothers, while developing personal resilience that served them throughout their monastic careers. The shared experience of thermal challenges created lasting bonds between monks who had faced similar survival ordeals. Novice thermal training also served as a natural selection process that identified candidates with physical and mental characteristics necessary for successful monastery life. Those who couldn't adapt to cold conditions often left communities voluntarily or were counseled toward alternative religious vocations that didn't require extreme thermal endurance. This screening function helped monasteries maintain membership capable of surviving their harsh living conditions. But novice training systems also created potential for abuse, where inexperienced monks might be subjected to dangerous conditions without adequate support or supervision. Some communities developed formal protocols for monitoring novice health and intervening when thermal exposures exceeded safe limits, while others relied on informal mentorship that might or might not provide adequate protection for vulnerable new members. The medical aspects of novice thermal adaptation required sophisticated understanding of human physiology and cold weather conditioning that some monasteries developed through generations of experience with training new monks. Brother infirmarian often played crucial roles in monitoring novice health and providing medical support during the adaptation process, balancing training requirements against health preservation. Different monasteries developed varying approaches to novice thermal training based on their local climate conditions community resources, and theological interpretations of the relationship between physical suffering and spiritual development. Northern European communities typically maintained more elaborate and challenging training programs than monasteries in milder climates, reflecting adaptation to local environmental demands. The integration of thermal training with spiritual formation created comprehensive novice education programs that addressed both practical survival skills and religious development necessary for successful monastic life. These holistic approaches recognized that monks needed both physical resilience and spiritual strength to thrive in communities where daily survival required constant attention to thermal management and cold weather survival techniques. The monastery adapts its rhythms to winter's harsh demands, with subtle seasonal modifications that acknowledge human thermal limits, while maintaining the appearance of unchanging spiritual discipline, allowing slightly longer sleep periods between night services and adjusting prayer schedules to minimize the most dangerous cold exposures without officially admitting that survival sometimes requires compromise with theological ideals. These aren't dramatic changes, just small mercies that can mean the difference between monks who wake up in spring and monks who don't wake up at all. Medieval monastery schedules operated according to complex calculations that balanced spiritual requirements against practical survival needs, creating seasonal flexibility that helped communities endure harsh winters while preserving their essential religious character. The canonical hours remained fixed in their theological significance, but their practical implementation showed subtle adaptations that reflected sophisticated understanding of human thermal limitations and cold weather survival requirements that couldn't be ignored without risking community extinction. Winter schedule modifications typically involved slightly compressed night services that reduced exposure time in unheated chapels while maintaining the essential elements of required prayers and worship. Matins might be shortened by eliminating optional psalms or reducing the time allocated for silent meditation, allowing monks to return to whatever warmth they could generate in dormitories more quickly. These changes were rarely documented officially, but represented practical accommodations that experienced abbots understood were necessary for community survival. But here's where medieval monastic wisdom reveals its pragmatic approach to theological interpretation. Seasonal schedule adjustments were often justified through theological arguments about adapting religious practice to support life preservation, which was considered a divine mandate that trumped strict adherence to comfort-denying austerity. Communities could modify their practices to prevent deaths, while maintaining their spiritual commitment by reframing survival accommodations as expressions of proper stewardship for the bodies God had entrusted to their care. The timing adjustments for winter schedules often concentrated the most challenging thermal exposures during daylight hours, when solar heating could provide minimal warming support while reducing nighttime activities that would have forced monks to leave heated spaces during the most dangerous cold periods. Dawn prayers might be delayed until sunrise provided some thermal relief, while evening services could be moved earlier to allow monks to retire to bed, while residual body heat from daily activities could help them generate warmth more effectively. Some monasteries developed sophisticated seasonal scheduling systems that coordinated prayer times with optimal thermal conditions throughout winter months. These schedules took advantage of solar heating patterns, coordinated with meal times when internal warming was available, and aligned major thermal challenges with periods when monks had access to heated spaces or warming activities that could provide thermal support before and after cold exposures. The flexibility of winter schedules also reflected practical considerations about fuel management and resource allocation that required careful balancing of heating priorities throughout the coldest months. Communities might concentrate their limited heating resources during specific periods when monks were most vulnerable, rather than spreading thermal support evenly throughout days and nights in ways that provided inadequate warming when it was most critically needed. Historians still argue whether seasonal schedule modifications represented legitimate theological adaptation or practical compromises that violated monastic principles about maintaining consistent spiritual discipline regardless of external conditions. Some religious authorities criticized communities that adjusted their practices for weather conditions, while others defended seasonal flexibility as necessary for preserving life and maintaining community functionality during extreme environmental challenges. The documentation of seasonal schedule changes reveals careful attention to maintaining theological justification for practical modifications that served obvious survival purposes. Monastery records typically emphasize spiritual rather than thermal motivations for winter adjustments, suggesting that communities understood the potential criticism while believing that survival accommodations were both necessary and religiously appropriate when properly understood and implemented. The psychological impact of seasonal schedule flexibility provided hope and adaptation support that helped monks endure winter conditions that might otherwise have seemed unbearably harsh. The knowledge that communities would make reasonable accommodations for extreme conditions helped maintain morale and prevented despair during the most challenging months when survival required every available advantage. But seasonal modifications also created potential for abuse, where communities might use weather conditions to justify excessive relaxation of spiritual discipline beyond what survival actually required. Some monasteries developed formal criteria for determining when schedule adjustments were necessary, while others relied on abbot discretion that might or might not maintain appropriate balance between practical needs and religious obligations. The coordination of seasonal schedules with other thermal management strategies created comprehensive winter survival systems that addressed monk welfare through integrated approaches, combining timing adjustments, heating resources, and activity modifications that optimized community survival without completely abandoning the spiritual disciplines that defined monastic life and religious commitment. Different monasteries developed varying approaches to seasonal schedule flexibility based on their local climate conditions, community resources, and theological interpretations of the relationship between spiritual discipline and practical survival requirements. Northern European communities typically maintained more extensive winter modifications than monasteries in milder climates, reflecting adaptation to local environmental demands that couldn't be ignored without risking community survival. The integration of seasonal flexibility with traditional monastic discipline created complex systems that preserved essential spiritual practices while acknowledging human limitations that required accommodation during extreme conditions. These balanced approaches represented sophisticated understanding of the relationship between physical welfare and spiritual development that recognized survival as a prerequisite for religious growth, rather than an obstacle to spiritual advancement. The legacy of seasonal monastery adaptations influenced broader medieval understanding of the relationship between religious ideals and practical survival requirements, demonstrating that successful spiritual communities needed to balance theological purity against human welfare in ways that preserved both religious authenticity and community viability during challenging environmental conditions. The first warm night of spring arrives like divine grace, bringing tears of gratitude to monks who have survived another medieval winter through sheer endurance, communal warmth, and the kind of stubborn resilience that transforms ordinary men into thermal warriors capable of finding spiritual meaning in suffering that would have broken most human beings. This isn't just weather improvement, it's resurrection made manifest through the simple miracle of sleeping without chattering teeth, breathing without visible clouds, and waking up with circulation still functioning in fingers and toes that have spent months dancing on the edge of frostbite. Medieval spring represented more than seasonal transition for monastery communities that had endured months of thermal ordeal through shared survival strategies, mutual support, and spiritual discipline that transformed cold endurance into religious practice. The first night when frost didn't form on dormitory walls, when candles burned without guttering in frigid draughts, when monks could sleep without pulling their knees to their chests in desperate heat conservation, these moments carried emotional weight that transcended mere physical comfort and entered the realm of spiritual revelation. But here's where the medieval monastic experience reveals its profound transformation of suffering into sacred meaning. The cold itself becomes a spiritual metaphor that connects physical endurance with divine understanding, where every frozen prayer service, every shivering night, every moment of thermal desperation serves as preparation for eternal life that requires souls capable of enduring whatever challenges await beyond earthly existence. The monastery's harsh conditions aren't obstacles to spiritual growth. They're the very mechanisms through which ordinary men develop extraordinary resilience. The legacy of monastic cold endurance extends far beyond medieval survival techniques into the realm of human spiritual development, where communities discovered that shared suffering creates bonds stronger than comfort ever could, that mutual dependence builds character more effectively than individual luxury, and that finding warmth together teaches lessons about divine love that can't be learned through theological study alone. These monks weren't just surviving winter, they were practicing for eternity. The spring awakening brings not just physical relief, but psychological transformation, as surviving monks realize they have accomplished something remarkable. They have faced down winter's worst challenges and emerged with their faith intact, their community stronger, and their understanding of human resilience permanently expanded. The warmth that finally penetrates stone walls and wool robes carries with it the knowledge that they are capable of enduring whatever trials their calling might require. As you drift towards sleep tonight, in your heated bedroom with your electric blankets and central heating systems humming quietly around you, remember those medieval monks who found ways to sleep in conditions that modern survival experts would consider genuinely life-threatening. Their nights were long, their mornings bitter, and yet they endured. They found warmth in community when individual comfort was impossible, discovered strength in shared vulnerability, and transformed survival itself into prayer. The monastery cold became a teacher that instructed souls in the deepest truths about human dependence, divine providence, and the mysterious ways that suffering can become a pathway toward understanding rather than merely an obstacle to overcome. Every winter night survived was a lesson learned, every dawn welcomed was a victory celebrated, and every spring arrival was resurrection experienced rather than simply observed. Their legacy whispers across centuries to remind us that true warmth comes not from external heating systems, but from the internal fires of community faith and shared endurance that can sustain human spirits through any challenge. The medieval monks who slept on wooden planks in frozen dormitories discovered thermal truths that central heating can never teach, that warmth shared is warmth multiplied, that survival is a community achievement rather than individual accomplishment, and that the deepest comfort comes from knowing you're not facing the cold alone. The sacred endurance they practice transforms physical hardship into spiritual discipline, mundane survival into mystical experience, an individual suffering into collective strength that builds communities capable of thriving under conditions that would destroy groups lacking such profound commitment to mutual support and shared purpose. And so the monastery sleeps finally warm, finally at peace, finally able to rest, without the constant struggle against cold that has defined their winter existence. The stone walls that trapped frost now hold gentle warmth. The wool blankets that barely prevented hypothermia now provide actual comfort, and the dormitory that echoed with chattering teeth now hums with the peaceful breathing of men who have proven their capacity for extraordinary endurance. The wind outside grows gentle, the night shorter, and the bells that call to prayer no longer summon monks from warm beds to frozen chapels, but invite them to celebrate the resurrection that arrives each spring for those who have earned it through winter's trial. They sleep now not as survivors but as victors, not as sufferers but as souls refined by fire, not as individuals but as a community forged in the crucible of shared cold into something stronger and more beautiful than comfort could ever create. The fire does not speak, but it listens. The stone walls do not embrace, but they shelter. The cold has not been conquered, but it has been transformed from enemy into teacher, from obstacle into opportunity, from curse into blessing that reveals the extraordinary capacity of ordinary human beings to find warmth in the most unlikely places and create light in the deepest darkness. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night.